There is a case in Alabama involving a 25-year-old man who was convicted of rape. In fact, he was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree rape and also 1 count of first-degree rape. However, his jail sentence was a little questionable. Take a look.
I don't understand. Like, I still can't even process it.
Baffled, Courtney Andrews says there's just no other way to describe how she feels after hearing that the man convicted of raping her repeatedly since she was 13 years old will somehow avoid jail. This week, an Alabama judge sentenced her attacker, 25-year-old Austin Clem, to a total of 30 years behind bars, but he suspended those sentences, opting to give Clem community corrections, equivalent to house arrest. Clem still has to register as a sex offender. Clem has a history of sexual assaults and, according to his attorney, was sent to a juvenile facility for a sex abuse case before he was 15. Frankly, the attorney said, I think the judge's sentence was surprising to most everyone in the courtroom. But with his track record, Andrews was convinced Clem would be sentenced to years in jail. Instead, Clem will avoid seeing the inside of a jail cell altogether if he follows the judge's orders. Even still, Dan Totten, Clem's defense attorney, says the sentence is too harsh. It doesn't appear from her actions that she was saying no, Totten said of the victim, saying the relationship was consensual. This is a case with 2 sides to the coin. The evidence was not clear and convincing.
Now, just to respond to what the attorney said there, he raped her in 2007 when she was 13 years old. He was either 18 or 19 at the time. So even if it wasn't forcible rape, which I hate that phrase, obviously it is statutory rape. And what I do find really fascinating is if you look at our current prisons and if you look at our justice system, you'll realize that about 3,278 people are serving life sentences without the chance of parole. And the majority of them are non-violent drug offenses. We have a case here where there is violence, there is rape, and for some reason this guy's never going to see a jail cell or a prison cell, which is absolutely insane. So you guys know my feelings on it. But just one more point that I'd like to make before we open it up to our panel. Dan Totten, the defense attorney for this guy, happens to be childhood friends with the judge. So let's just keep that in mind when we discuss what's going on right now in Alabama. Jody, I want to start off with you. What do you feel is happening with this case?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, again, I see this as a symptom of a larger problem. We don't take women's sexual autonomy interests seriously in this country if there's not physical force. And even then, you can have some problems. But when you get into a date rape context or a statutory rape context, you have R. Kelly getting acquitted several years back now with his face on the camera having sex with a 13, 14, 15-year-old. He got acquitted by a jury. The jury doesn't take this seriously. The American public doesn't take it seriously enough. Date rape on campuses, when it doesn't involve physical force, will result in you getting booted from that campus. I can tell you that if it comes before a board of hearing officers, you're going to get booted from the campus, but few of those cases are prosecuted by prosecutors outside the campus because they know they're going to run into jurors who aren't sympathetic. So taking women's sexual autonomy interests more seriously when there's not physical force involved is something that we just don't do and we need to start doing. It needs to be a mass movement in that direction, and it's not there now.
Priscilla, do you feel that this might be a symptom of slut shaming? Because whenever we have a case of rape, whether it be a high school student or a grown adult, oftentimes what you'll hear is, well, did they, was it forcible? Like there's always this argument of forcible rape, right? So what do you think that's all about? There's this notion that somehow this woman wanted it. Where does that come from?
I think it speaks to some of the points that Jody was making. It's sort of our culture of victim shaming, blaming women for behavior that people think is inappropriate. And what was she doing with him at that time? What was she doing out at night? What was she wearing? Why did she go to his room, right? As if that any of those behaviors, if justifies men coercing women into sexual acts that they don't want to engage in, right? So this idea that women are, in fact, sort of goading men, right? Including women who are or aren't even women, right? Girls as young as 13 years old. There was a case out of Montana where a teacher was convicted of raping a 13-year-old girl who subsequently killed herself. That teacher was sentenced to 30 days. in jail. And the judge said she was the one that was in control. Sort of women as lustful, lascivious, people,
Biblical.
right?
Eve.
Biblical, right?
Eve.
Who are tempting men into assaulting them. And so that is at the root of the blaming, right? For girls as young as 13 on up to women who are 72 years old. I mean, this happens across the board. And women are just blamed for their behavior, right? They're blamed for men's behavior.
So, Diane, you've talked a little bit about mandatory jail sentencing and how problematic it can be. Is this a case where mandatory jail sentencing makes sense in the cases of rape or, of course, cases like murder, something that is serious, that involves real violence?
Well, what I'm really hoping, apparently the judge overstepped what he's allowed to do, and the case is being appealed, and there may be a prison sentence imposed after all, because apparently he was not allowed to set aside these serious felonies and allow him to go home. So I find mandatory minimums a nightmare. Most judges need to use discretion, especially when we're dealing with defendants who are overwhelmingly poor and traumatized and did not have decent defense attorney because they couldn't afford one. It's not just the mandatory minimums. I mean, what we've seen, especially with young people in Los Angeles, is all the enhancements. Another 10 years on your sentence if you belong to a gang, which you may not even belong to. If you're a kid of color and live in a certain neighborhood, automatically it's a gang enhancement. A gun enhancement, even if there was a gun on the scene and you never touched it and didn't even know it was there, that's another 10 years. Is it in the vicinity of a school? That's another 10 years. So you have 14-year-old kids who never actually killed anyone getting sentences of like 110 years to life. And the judges, I've been in the courtroom where the judges have said, my hands are tied. Once the guilty sentence is passed, the judge's hands are tied. How do you send a 14-year-old kid away, 110 years to life? That's being challenged now. A lot of those kids will have a chance to have a parole hearing in 10 years. The parole board is not very honest. So it doesn't mean they're going to get out.
Not very empathetic either, I imagine.
No, but they're very arbitrary and capricious, to use the legal terms. So what we're seeing is that judges should be able to use some compassion and empathy when the case warrants it, and they're not allowed to in way too many cases.
And I think this isn't a case about mandatory minimums. This is, and when we talk about our criminal justice system, often it's not just about mandatory minimums. It's about our culture and and the value that we afford to certain people and not others, right? So women's lives and their sexual autonomy is not valued, but men's are, right? You have the lives of Black and Latino youth, Black and Latino women who are valued, and others who are not valued, and whites are. You have the parenting capacities of white women valued, whereas Black and Latino women are seen as undeserving, right? So you have this culture that devalues certain people while uplifting the humanity of others. And that's really what's at the root of all of what we're seeing, right? And we see these different policies as manifestations of this devaluing of Black and Latino lives, devaluing the lives of women, devaluing the choices that they make with respect to their reproductive and sexual autonomy. And that's what's really at the crux of this. It's not just about discretion. It's about the culture, it's about our systems, it's about our institutions and the values that they promote.
But I think in this case, there's a contradictory value here with autonomy. We're talking about women's autonomy over their bodies, but I think with our culture, with a lot of what you see on TV and in music, there's a belief among a lot of people that 13-year-olds have complete autonomy over their bodies, and they choose to give their bodies. So this whole notion of female autonomy is a double-edged sword that can be used against us, and in cases like this, it certainly was.